But I did write a sermon, so you're not that lucky, okay? Please rise in body and spirit for our reading from Scripture. It comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 49 through 56. It reads, "I've come to light a fire on the earth. How I wish the blaze were ignited already. There is a baptism I must still receive, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think I'm here to bring peace on earth? I tell you the opposite of true. I've come to bring division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law." Jesus said again to the crowds, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, you will immediately say the rain is coming, and so it does. When the wind blows from the south, you say it's going to be hot, and so it is. You hypocrites, if you can interpret the portents of the earth and sky, why can't you interpret the present time?" Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Please pray with me. God, may the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be held by you here in this moment. Amen. Oh my, this is not the Jesus we're used to. This is Jesus getting real. I mean, really real. Jesus is not pulling any punches. Jesus is ready to slice and dice. Jesus is fired up and calling down fire. Calling down fire. What I want to focus on is that bit about dividing family against family member. So Jesus' hyperbolic, over-the-top, slash-and-burn language of dividing up families with a sword and burning up everything in sight with his fiery rhetoric is grounded. I think it's grounded in some very real estrangement between Jesus and his family. Some real estrangement between Jesus and his family. You know, Jesus uses a lot of family language. Jesus uses the parental language to describe his relationship with God, calling God Abba, Aramaic for dad or dada, envisioning God as the householder who makes sure everything in the world house has enough. Jesus' message and teaching to turn away from empire and to turn towards this Abba God and this God's kingdom that is a way of life and community grounded in kinship, mutual relationships of belonging, responsibility, care in the midst of shared vulnerability. All this family language revolves around suggestions in the gospel that maybe Jesus did not get along with his actual family. The Gospel of Mark reports that Jesus' family thought he was crazy. That's Mark 3, verse 21, if you want to look it up. Both the Gospels of Matthew and Luke tell us Jesus was rejected after preaching in his hometown synagogue. In Luke's longer, more dramatic version, Jesus is chased to the edge of the town where his kinfolk threaten to throw him off the cliff's edge. That's Luke 4, 16 through 30, if you want to look it up. When informed that his mother and siblings were waiting to talk with him, the author of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, places these words on Jesus' lips. "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does the will of my Abba in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Matthew 12, 48b through 50, if you want to look that one up. Woof. When Jesus says he's wielding a sharp sword enough to sever the relationships between parents and children, to set sibling against sibling, he has primarily, I think, his own family in mind. His own family in mind. Jesus' family and kinsfolk, his hometown crowd, they didn't understand or approve of his message, his ministry, or his lifestyle. They were scandalized. They were offended. confused, maybe worried that he had fallen off the deep end, or maybe on occasion just wanted to throw him off the deep end. I mean, so much for Christian family values, right? Family conflict, estrangement, rejection. That's real life. That's real life, isn't it? The gospel tells us Jesus ran up against misunderstanding, confusion, rejection, offense, disgust from the religious political authorities of his day. I assume Jesus was prepared for that reaction. He expected those folks to give him grief. But his family and his hometown crowd? I mean, I have to think that stung a bit, that it cut deep. How many of you can empathize, even sympathize with Jesus' familial woes? Anyone? Yeah. With his heartbreak, with his red-hot frustration, his exasperation, his desire to create his own chosen family. I empathize and sympathize. Let me tell you a few short personal stories. So when I told my parents I felt a call to ministry, my mom was not happy. Her dream was for me to be a medical doctor. She told me I was wasting my brains, wasting my smarts on being a minister. And if you have ever been a kid or a parent, you know when a parent says that just made me want to be a minister more. After college, I served a year as an AmeriCorps member at Sinai Grace Hospital's HIV/AIDS clinic. I remember excitingly telling a leader I respected at my home church about my work. I really felt that I was following Jesus and doing this work with AmeriCorps. Their response, ew, who would want to do that? In 2010, I helped found a United Methodist-related immigration legal aid clinic here in Metro Detroit. My grandpa, who I loved, helped raise me. When I shared it with him, he told me, you know what, you got to be careful. You got to make sure you're helping the right people and not letting terrorists in. Woof. Woof. Well, I bet my bottom dollar that many, probably most, maybe all of you can also resonate with Jesus and have similar, if not more intense stories than I do. In each of these incidents I cited, relationships were never completely severed, but they were strained, certainly changed. Some were reconciled, others not so much. I would point to each incident that I shared that I really felt I was living out gospel values, doing my best to follow Jesus, to love God and love neighbors, and was met with misunderstanding, offense, confusion, and worry. As for me, heartbreak, hurt, frustration, annoyance, red-hot anger, they were my responses about 100% of the time to these comments. Sometimes when we act on what we believe, when we really make a choice to follow Jesus in real life, we will encounter this reaction. We will encounter this reaction. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, called it submitting to be more vile. Submitting to be more vile. The phrase, I submitted to be more vile, comes from John Wesley's journal. He used it to describe his choice to take up his friend, Reverend George Whitfield's invitation to join him in field preaching. Now, the word vile comes from the Latin vilis, meaning cheap, worthless, base, or common. In common parlance, it elicits feelings of disgust and repulsion. Why would a Methodist want to be vile? So, that field preaching, the practice of preaching in the open air in spaces and places where people, especially working class and poor people, gathered, was not considered socially respectable or even religiously acceptable. It was not proper for an Anglican priest or Oxford Don like Wesley to preach in the fields. He broke decorum and disobeyed church law by preaching in the field and by preaching in parishes where he was not invited or welcomed, or that were outside of his diocese. By doing the more vile thing, Wesley followed God's love out of the sanctuary and into the streets to meet people. People who had gone disillusioned or worse, been hurt and ignored by the institutional church. People who had been left behind or exploited by the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. People traumatized by the violence and loss of war. Wesley decided to preach in the field, to follow Jesus, to meet people where they were at, just as they were. Just as they were. Ashley Bogan, a United Methodist historian and the current director of our denominational archives, calls this disruption of the status quo to pursue the inclusive, boundary-breaking love of God, she calls it Wesleyan vitality, sort of a play on the word vitality. Wesleyan vitality. In her book of the same title, she shares how early Methodists were considered generally scandalous for their refusal to conform, for embracing prison ministry, elevating women preachers, and ministering to society's most marginalized. Bogan shares the powerful, lesser-known story of Wesley's public defense of Thomas Blair, a man imprisoned in the late 1700s for a same-sex relationship. An act of advocacy that provoked public outrage. It marked the first recorded use of the term Methodist in print. You heard that right. Methodist was the name given to the community Wesley formed not out of respect or admiration, but of ridicule, slander, and to dismiss this scandalous group of people who dared to follow Jesus in real life. Now, I do want to pause here and say this is a word of wisdom I heard years ago from my mentor, the late Terry Gladstone. Terry was a deacon. She worked for our conference staff for many years and did a lot of work with clergy people around the state. And she had this kind of word of caution. She said, "I've met a lot of pastors who tell me they're prophets, but they're really jerks. They use the pulpit sort of as a bully pulpit. And so it really made me step back." And she's like, you gotta really discern, are you being prophetic or are you just being a jerk? So that's a word of caution for all of us, right? Right? Is our vileness grounded in God's love? Or is it just grounded in our own selfishness? All right, back to the regular scheduled program. You know, Central certainly has a streak of Wesleyan vitality. I was only here at Central a few months when two different downtown business leaders, our neighbors, contacted me to complain that our church allowed people to sleep on our steps instead of calling the police and having them arrested and carted away. That sound familiar? That strategy sound familiar? They didn't use the term vile, but it was clear they were disgusted, with one of them calling our church disgraceful. Providing a refuge for those who have been pushed out of every corner of downtown and refusing to cooperate in criminalizing homelessness is not disgraceful. It is, in my humble opinion, the epitome of grace. And for those who follow Jesus, a wandering teacher whom the Gospels say had no place to lay his head, I mean, what else are we really to do but to submit to be more vile for the sake of compassion, care, and love? To the neighbor who called us disgraceful, I offered the invitation to help us build permanent supportive housing on our location. The conversation ended shortly after that. But I hold out hope that there might just yet be a future conversation. So let me end with a bit of hope. The Gospels tell us Jesus' mother Mary was at the foot of the cross when he died. The book of Acts, that first tome of church history included in the Bible, tells us Mary and Jesus' brother James were among the leaders of the early church. Not all of Jesus' family remained estranged or cut off in the end. Some came around. Some relationships were mended. Some submitted to joining Jesus in his vileness. Minds can change. Hearts can change. Lives can change. Relationships can change. Even in real life, even in our real lives, we all can change. As vile as it sounds, sometimes, just sometimes, an enemy can become a friend. May it be so.